Hello everybody, today is something of a celebration of Britishness. I have spent the entirety of the morning cursing the weather because it is nearly the end of July and I am still having to cancel reviews because for some reason it's raining. Somebody this morning actually tried to tell me it's the summer, but of late I haven't really seen much evidence to support that. Calendar be damned, where's the sunshine gone? Then, to follow that up, I had my childhood lunch, which is a ham and tomato sandwich in a nice soft white roll, and it was delicious, a locally sourced ham, and weirdly, tomatoes from Belgium. And so it seems only appropriate to round off the day by trying to tell you why it is that this notoriously awful and unreliable car with its ancient underpinnings is actually quite good. Yeah. Oh, and I'm nearly out of daylight too. Let's get cracking. Jesus wept. So then, what do we have today? This is a 2002 Land Rover Discovery 2. It has been brought to me by serial car guy Brad, who currently is very much at the top of the JAYEMM leaderboard for number of cars brought to the channel. I think this might be number 8, and in 2 days' time, he's bringing me number 9. And that I'm very looking forward to, because it's an old Rolls Royce. Hardcore fans of the channel may recall that not too long ago I actually reviewed another Land Rover owned by Brad. In that case, it was a P38 generation Range Rover. Having had a succession of Japanese vehicles, Brad decided that for a trip away and also just to change things up a bit, he wanted to get himself a 4x4. And what is the best 4x4 by far? Of course, it has to be a Land Rover, more specifically a Range Rover. So he got that, took it on a trip, really enjoyed it, then sold it. Then, a little while after, having thoroughly enjoyed himself, he decided to give it another go. This time his destination was the Peak District. Previously he'd been to Snowdonia, and his companion on this trip was going to be a Discovery. I don't think he actually had much in the way of particular reasoning. He certainly didn't need the 7 seats for which the Discovery has become famous. But I must confess, Brad has been twisting my arm to review this car for ages. And though I really enjoyed the Discovery 4 when I drove it, the Discovery 1 and 2 is a very different beastie. Because you see, not only is just about every single old Discovery I seem to see a total and complete heap, but underneath this car, built in 2002 and discontinued in 2004, you will find effectively the chassis from a Range Rover Classic. In other words, underneath this car is a technology and a platform that dates back to the late 1960s. So it's body-on-frame construction with live axles, front and rear, and to top that all off, it was built deliberately to have an interior that was a little lower rent than that in the Range Rover. The idea of the Discovery was to really fill a few gaps in the Land Rover catalogue. Not only did it bridge the gap between the Land Rover itself, what we now call the Defender, and the ever more upmarket Range Rover, it also provided them with a 7-seat option too. By default, in your regular full-time 5-seater mode, you've got a very generously sized boot, and your passengers in the rear have got plenty of headroom as well, courtesy of that sort of trademark Discovery stepped profile side roof. You've also got a secondary sunroof in the back, and you've even got a few luxuries like little nets as well for your rear passengers to store their stuff. This one even has picnic tables too. Then, in the back, if you do need the extra seat capacity, the seats themselves are actually hidden in the side of the boot. They fold out, and in a couple of movements, they'll be clicked in, and the headrests are built into the ceiling. Very nice. I have to say, as soon as Brad actually turned up with this car, I felt like an absolute plum, because I set eyes on it and went, actually, that is in ludicrously good condition. The weird sort of champagne-y colour ordinarily I wouldn't be a big fan of, but particularly in this gorgeous fading magic hour sunlight, it is actually quite nice. The interior in particular my word, it's really, really tidy. The only two things I've noted are that there is a crack on the little dash housing here, which is a very common problem, and the headlining here has dropped just a little bit, though it's actually not anywhere near as bad as it looks because of the shape of the roof. The wheel, the dash and the buttons in here are all what you'd describe as functional. Even in the early 2000s, they wouldn't have felt particularly upmarket, but nor do they feel particularly cheap. The first Discovery had landed back in 1989, when that chassis maybe didn't seem quite as out of date, on account of the fact it was still in use in the regular Range Rover. By the time this rolled around though, in 1998, the Range Rover had been superseded by the P38 and really was already on borrowed time, because the new L322 would have already been in the works. Though the underpinnings were left fundamentally alone, apparently some 700 plus changes were made to turn the Discovery 1 into the Discovery 2. At a quick glance, you'd think that they shared the same body panels too, but in fact, the only ones which haven't changed are the rear doors. The big news for many was the introduction of a new diesel engine, the 2.5 litre 5-cylinder TD5, not developed by BMW as rumours often state, but in fact an evolution of a unit used by Rover themselves. It produces, are you ready for this, just over 120 horsepower. But that's okay, isn't it? Because it's a diesel, they're all about torque, of which it makes just over 230 pound-foot, which is just over 300 newton meters. In other words, the same as this, the 4-litre Thor V8, which also doesn't really deserve its name on account of the fact that Thor makes about 180 or 190 horsepower. Anorax will also tell you that though badged a 4-litre, this is actually a 3.9 version of the venerable Rover V8. It was also reworked compared with the version used in the previous car, and you could also get it in 4.6-litre guise, though here in the UK, that I am told, is a very rare thing indeed. In terms of gearbox, you had a choice of either a 5-speed manual or this, the 4-speed automatic. You then had a centre differential giving you all that sort of 4-wheel drive goodness. And I am told these cars, on account of their Range Rover underpinnings, are proper off-roaders. Unfortunately, I am an off-roading troglodyte and know next to nothing about it or what really makes a car good for it. I can tell you that this car has had its self-leveling suspension removed and replaced with a regular coils and springs kit with a lift of either 2 or 4 inches, we're not sure. In any case, it looks proper, it's got plenty of clearance, and this car has a bit of a party piece too. Brad took it to the petrol station not that long ago, and he started filling it. Put in £40, £60, £80, £100, and thought, well, you know, it is a Land Rover, it's thirsty, it does maybe 20 odd to the gallon on a run and not anywhere near that around town, so, you know, 100 quid is reasonable, it's going to be a big tank. And then it got to 120 quid, 140, and stopped at £201, or to put that in a more useful term, 142 litres. Naturally, Brad felt like Mr. Tesco was trying to con him, but it turns out, somewhat I think to his embarrassment, that somebody's actually fitted this car with a long-range tank. We don't know exactly how big it is, but it is bigger than 142 litres. Love that. There were several trim levels available for this car, and honestly, I have absolutely no idea which one this is. But it does have a sort of half leather, half suede effect interior. You've got a few pieces of wood here and there, but nowhere near as much as you'd have got in a Range. The whole thing does actually feel relatively solid. There's a little bit of creaking here and there, but I think it actually drives better than Brad's P38. It doesn't have anywhere near the amount of shimmy that many body-on-frame cars do, and I'm actually really rather enjoying it. The steering is beautiful in that way that Range Rovers often are. Yeah, sure, it's a little on the slow side and occasionally vague, but that's the car, not the steering. It communicates to you exactly what it's doing. I love it. Visibility is fantastic. You have the command driving position, of which Land Rover are rightly very proud. So even though it's a big car, you can place it with absolute millimeter precision. All of the pillars are thin, as are the frames for the windows. I mean, they're like that, real old school. As is the pedal spacing. Considering the fact that this is an automatic, and I suspect most of these were, and it's a very big and generous footwell, you would have expected there to be plenty of space down there. But no, the throttle, it feels like it's sort of just outside the car, and the brake is all the way over and very big. So this actually is a car where I feel a little bit stupid for having worn my regular trainers to drive. It's a little bit sketchy. But I'll manage. It's not that bad. You just don't have any room whatsoever. I have the gearbox in its sports mode, operated by the little switch down here, and that just holds onto the gear a little bit longer. There are a few Range Rover-y quirks in here, like the fact that these window switches are not at all logically laid out, so you'd imagine that the ones at the front do the front windows. They don't. They do the back. This tiny little screen in the middle here is a retrofitted reverse camera, and though in the 21 years since this rolled off the production line our idea of luxury might have changed a little bit, there is still enough in here to make you go, yeah, this is nice. It's had a modern Pioneer head unit retrofitted, and that does tell me a lot, because Pioneer is good kit. So the person who had this car previously wasn't afraid to spend a few quid. It has dual zone climate control, and if it did still have its original self-leveling suspension, which I believe is an air system, but please don't quote me on that, there's a button here to raise the car too. I am often one to say that to me, technology and luxury are rarely synonymous, because no matter how new and fancy a car is, in 5 years it will be out of date. And so I think luxury really should be judged on the basis of comfort, quality of material, smoothness of ride, and there the car does okay, considering it isn't the top of the range thing. The fact it is a little bit crashy here and there is somewhat forgivable, and the ride quality isn't as horrendous as I thought it might be. It's also had groove discs fitted for better stopping power, and they do seem to work fairly well, and you've got a stainless steel exhaust as well, giving you just a little bit more of that V8 burble. But of course I know what you're thinking, James, yeah, that's all well and great, you're having a bit of fun because you've driven it for half an hour, in which time it hasn't broken down or exploded once. Well, that is partly true. However, when I began to do my research on these, and I thought that just about every single website was going to tell me to stay away, and that removing parts of one's own body with a rusty spoon would have been preferable, what I actually found was a little bit more conflicting. In essence, the advice that I've gleaned is as simple as this: buy a good one. At this point in time, none of them are particularly young, which is a very good thing, because it means that there has been enough time for the bad ones to have been kind of weeded out. And hopefully the examples that you're left with are either decent examples, such as this, or ones that are very obviously bad. The original Discovery apparently had an affinity for rust. The bodies simply melted away. The chassis was actually fairly durable. Here, somehow, they've switched that around, so the bodies are fairly solid, but the chassis do go. And that is potentially a little more problematic. As this is essentially a facelift of the first car, many of the improvements made were in terms of quality and reliability, and the general consensus is that that kinda did work. In 2002, these were facelifted. This is a last of the pre-facelifts, and the easy way to tell them apart is by the headlights, which for the later ones have the kind of pockety style with the lights themselves in individual housings within the headlight itself. Though do beware, apparently some people like to switch the headlights around to make their car appear more youthful than it actually is. In the time that he's owned it, Brad has really only encountered one issue with this car, which is a failed alternator. That did strand him, but in all honesty, a bad alternator, well, you could get that with just about anything. And at 21 years old and 133,000 miles, I think it's reasonable that that needed replacing. He did also check the underside to ascertain the condition of the chassis and found only a smattering of surface corrosion, which is now treated and protected, meaning the car should be decent for quite some time. handily, as they were a fairly popular thing. You can still get most of the parts, and generally speaking, they're not that expensive either. Knowing really next to nothing about these cars, when I asked Brad how much he'd paid for it, I fully expected him to say about £7,000 or £8,000, and I would have thought that would have been a fairly reasonable sum. But actually, it was about half that. And there are cars out there that maybe aren't in quite as good a condition as this, from around £2,000, with the very best of them up at about 10, and one very optimistic example that's a special edition of some sort, 50th anniversary or something, I don't know, that's at 20 grand, but that is clearly an outlier. And I gotta say, though I know underneath this is a 50-year-old car, it's actually really annoyingly good. I'm really impressed with it, to the extent that when he told me he was thinking of selling it, I thought, oh, I could have that. I was like, no, stop it, James, stop it. I've just bought another car, you see, and I'll be telling you about that one very, very soon. But for now, I want to say a big thanks to Brad for bringing yet another of his marvellous cars out, and as ever, to you for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button, comment down below, and subscribe if you haven't already. I'll see you for the next one. Bye-bye.